Welcome. Thank you all for coming. Myself and David will do a quick introduction here, but you are in the session talking about the curricular experience of transfer students in engineering. So if that does not sound like what you're here for, now is a good time to leave. And so we are doing some really cool work and are excited to be here today. Thank you to Nistis and thank you to all of you for coming. We're excited to present. So who are we? I am the first person listed there, Dustin Grote. I'm currently a PhD student in the higher education program. I'm interested in higher education policy, organization structures, things like that, but all related to transfer students. I spent the last several years of my professional career working at Community College of Denver in Colorado, and so fell in love with everything about the community college mission, the community college spirit, culture, goals, and so my interest is to take the work I'm doing in a PhD program and advance the work of transfers and of access. So I'm currently working as well as a GRA with this gentleman here, so I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi everybody, my name is David Knight. I'm an associate professor in engineering education. Not a lot of people know about our field. And so what's neat about our field is it combines kind of a higher ed focus, learning science focus, but it places us within the engineering context. And so we are in the College of Engineering. We run a PhD program with engineering ed research. We have about 40-ish PhD students in our program, but we also run the first year engineering program for the entire College of Engineering. So we have upwards of 2,200 first year engineering students and transfer students all start in our department. And so what's cool about our program is that we do educational research on the engineering context, and we are operating a lot within the transfer student space. So this is a perfect conference for us to attend. Since we have a full hour together, we thought we'd kick things off by getting some conversation going. So if you would, introduce yourself to somebody you don't know, share your name, institution, what role you have, and then identify a few pain points that you experience and feel with the transfer process. And hopefully some of the ideas that we talk about today can give you some things to take back to your campuses to try out or think about. So let's get some conversation going.
So a quick overview of what we're going to talk about. This session is particularly focused on the first semester experience once students transfer. So all the data you'll see, all the conversations that you're going to see, and some of the quotes from advisors that we've talked to are related to the first semester. Before I move further, I did forget to introduce Abbey, Rowe, Erwin over there, who is the former transfer advisor in engineering, helped put all of this together. And now you do work with sororities and fraternities, all at Virginia Tech. So thank you for coming as well. And so we're going to talk about the first semester experience. In particular, we're going to focus on how policies play out for students. We're also going to look specifically at some courses or groupings of courses and how that impacts GPA. And then talk a little bit about how folks deal with advising first semester students and the complexities of dealing with that. Hopefully we'll have some time as well at the end to really get into conversation and hear from some of you about what things are working well in your worlds. To connect this to the larger conference, the lenses that were talked about in the beginning session of the conference, transfer advocacy talked about, do I know my transfer student data? And you're going to see a lot of de-identified student data here that we are going to explore. So, cool. I'm going to let David talk about the project.
So this work is enabled by an NSF STEM grant. So STEM is a really great program in that 60% of the grant has to be spent directly on students. It's their scholarship program. And so we are fortunate enough to have a $5 million one. So there are lots of different components to it. Today we'll be talking about the research part of it. STEM made a transition a few years back to really ramp up the research part of it. It used to be predominantly focused on scholarships, but the grant program decided to shift into more of a researchy space also. This is a partnership between Virginia Tech and our two largest feeder institutions for engineering transfer students, Northern Virginia Community College, which consists of 5 campuses in the Northern Virginia region, and then Virginia Western Community College. And so what the the grant is intended to do is to, yes, focus on certain cohorts of students from a financial support perspective, but it's really designed to transform the transfer student experience for all transfer students at Virginia Tech. And so that's the part of the project that we'll be talking about today is before students arrive to Virginia Tech, we really want to understand what's happening so we know how to best support certainly the students associated with the grant by the time they arrive. If we can go back one more time. So just to give you a sense of a little bit about what we do as part of the program, the grant fully supports the community college tuition for all students involved. So that is 2 years. It's designed as a 2+. We are shooting for 2 once they transfer to Virginia Tech. We know we have a lot of work to do there, but I think we're getting the front end right to move students through the community college phase in 2 years. So we'll pay for full tuition for 2 years there. We also bring students on a study abroad program their first year at a community college, and it's a Virginia Tech study abroad program, so they have a built-in cohort of students by the time they transfer to Virginia Tech. In the second year, we do paid summer research where we bring students into faculty research labs the summer before they're actually starting classes at Virginia Tech. Once students transfer to Virginia Tech, they receive a $10,000 scholarship each year as part of the program. Yes?
How did they get into the program?
Sure. So our community college partners run the recruitment for that, and essentially we fill as many spots as we can afford with the grant. There are limitations. There has to be a certain level of financial need to receive that scholarship money, and so it's really us working with our community college partners. The real neat thing about this is it's really done a good job developing a cohort sense of students at the community college, which had never happened before this grant was in place. All right, and then we can go on. And I want to acknowledge our colleagues. Dr. Beverly Watford is our Associate Dean for Undergraduate Education in the College of Engineering at Virginia Tech. She's a PI. One of my colleagues in engineering, Walt Lee, is also on the project. And then we have really fantastic partners at the community colleges where they receive money from the grant also. And I think what's been neat is that the grant was the catalyst for a lot of this engagement. You know, the money is certainly really helpful from a scholarship perspective, but there are a lot of ideas that we have going that doesn't need the financial support. So hopefully some of those ideas are things that you can bring back to your campuses. Any questions? Okay.
Cool. All right, so now a little bit about engineering on a whole at Virginia Tech. Specifically for transfer students. So in looking at what we call the transfer ecosystem at Virginia Tech, where are students coming from? As we just mentioned, our 2 Virginia Tech NETS partners are Nova and Virginia Western Community College, and they make up 32% of the total enrollment for transfer students. The other VCCS schools make up another 33%, so a good chunk, over half of our students are coming from the community college system in Virginia. So we're excited about the grant being a good example of how to best support these students. And then the rest are coming from a variety of other institutions, but mostly lateral. And a lot of those are Virginia lateral schools. A few big policies come into play when we're going to have and go through the conversations today about the transfer process. The first is the Articulation Agreement. So the College of Engineering has an Articulation Agreement with the Virginia Community College System. And the requirements for that, for students to meet that, are completing of an AS degree in engineering. They must complete a set of appropriate prerequisite courses. And if you want to know what those are, ask Abbey, not me. And a minimum 3.2 GPA. And that's recently gone up from 3.0. If a student completes all of those things, the benefits that they receive as part of the agreement are guaranteed admission into general engineering at Virginia Tech. And they also get a waiver or get a fulfillment of their general education course requirements as part of that. So we'll talk about, those will come into play as we have discussions about transfer students. There's one other policy that happens when students arrive. So if they meet all of these requirements, they show up, they're in the College of Engineering in the General Engineering program, which is not a degree granting program. And then in their first semester, they must meet this enrollment management policy requirement as well. And so the requirements for this are completing of 12 credits of coursework at Virginia Tech, a minimum GPA of 3.0, and then a completion of those same prerequisite courses. So if they came in needing or having gaps in those, they would need to fulfill those as part of this policy. By completing these requirements, the benefit that they get is they get their first choice degree granting major. They get entry into that. May it be mechanical or chemical, so on and so forth. And these two policies have a really interesting interplay for students. As a quick, we wanted to show you how students experience the college structure at Virginia Tech. So prospective students pretty much exclusively work with staff that are in the College of Engineering. There's one particular person who does some of the outreach and handles information on that end. I didn't even, you're from admissions, and I didn't even mention that. So admissions is a totally separate process at Virginia Tech. So there's nothing happening in terms of college engineering as a part of admissions. Students will, if they get through that, they will come to the College of Engineering. Once students are admitted, during their first semester, they're designed to work with advising folks in the Department of Engineering Education with supplemental support from a College of Engineering transfer advisor. And that person typically only works with our two biggest transfer partners and not the other students. And then if a student then meets the enrollment management policy and they are admitted into a degree program, then they are transitioned to work for or work with the degree granting departments who all have advisors in them. So interesting that they're going through sort of several different levels of information before they even get to the end of their first year at Virginia Tech. I wanted to give just a quick snapshot of where this information is going to come from. So the bulk of this work comes from a data collection that we did this past fall and spring in interviews with faculty and advisors around the transfer of coursework process. So we sat down and had a list of questions about how does this work, the whole transfer of coursework process. We did some coding of this and then realized that there are things that are happening that are described by advising and faculty folks that work with transfer students, and we wanted to see if it's true in the data, and we wanted to understand what's really happening. And so we sort of split and are doing both a quantitative analysis and qualitative analysis, and you'll see both as we go through today. And then we're interested in sharing the story now that we're having a little bit more information about both. A really quick bit about the data behind all of this research. In terms of qualitative data, we talked with 24 different folks. 5 of those are at the community college as well. The bulk of what you see today is folks that are at Virginia Tech. The protocol areas are here, and if you're interested in learning more about that, I'm happy to share it after the fact. And then in terms of quantitative data, I wanted to give you a sense of what students we're talking about. So we have a set of engineering transfer students from across 7 years, from fall 2009 to 2016. We're just looking at their first semester, and that's a total of 2,200 students. We do a little bit of comparing as well to first-time in college students in a similar date range, and so that's about 11,000 students we'll look at. We're particularly interested in, you'll see, cumulative GPA and then what courses they take. Okay. So a really quick bit about kind of the interview process. So in coding interviews, which are several of folks talked for longer than an hour, and I don't know if any of you have ever done coding before, but it's a laborious process. And a great process, but a laborious process. And so in terms of initial codes, there were 742 times that people talked about articulation agreements and another 161 that talked about curriculum. We dug in more into those to figure out what people were really talking about. And one of the main outcomes we came up with is that what's happening in terms of a degree completion is impacting what courses students take when they arrive, in particular in their first semester. And so that's what we'll go through today. This is the code we are calling it in terms of research is this first semester technical course overload that seems to be happening for students. So the first theme that we have within these codes is this idea of the gen ed benefit. I know for me, when I saw that, I was like, oh, that's great. As a person who was in the community college, I'm glad that there's something that guarantees that they're getting credit for the work that they're doing at the community college. I'm glad that that's being fulfilled. And interestingly, as I started to read through this and have these conversations with folks, it wasn't so clear that it was so positive. So let me share a few of these. I'll read this first one. So the student coming from a community college, all of their gen ed courses and core courses have already been taken because they met the gen ed requirement. That presents a difficulty in some aspects because they don't want to take extra courses. But you can't take 5 technical courses in a semester. That's just not good practice. Everybody adds a fluff course somewhere so that you have some breathing room. So it's like all their breathing room is gone. This next quote is similar, where we're talking about when students are changing from one institution to another, they're going to have all these things to handle anyways, but then you add in the technical course piece as well, and they tend to not be as good. I'd labeled here for you that these particular quotes came from college faculty and staff, so folks that work for the College of Engineering. And what you'll notice is we have several more quotes, and they are coming from the other parts of the college or parts of the engineering world as well. So everybody is kind of saying this message. I'll read this quote. So I found that to be really tricky because I could look at an institution and I could tell a student everything to take to satisfy the first 2 years at Virginia Tech for any of the engineering disciplines. So they're saying they could go and tell a student exactly what they should take at the community college to fulfill it. But that's not practical, and it actually ends up hurting them in the long run because when they come here, now they don't have lower level courses to take. So even if they're being advised correctly, it's not necessarily helping them in the long run. We have another person who talked about the question of the value of an associate's degree, and is it actually helping students by completing this if the gen ed benefit is harming students? This particular advisor was suggesting that maybe a 1-year transition was actually better for students than 2 years, which is a powerful message to send, especially when you're a community college person who probably wouldn't agree with that. But I wanted to make sure that was shown here. This person says, and this is an engineering faculty, so in a specific discipline, and they said they have nothing to take except really, really hard classes. This last quote talks about the design of the gen ed requirements. So let me read this one because it's really relevant for what we're going to talk about next. I worry a little bit about the burnout. The reason we have the check sheet or a degree requirement, degree plan, the way it is because it's very balanced. You have the gen ed required courses littered throughout. You have a balance of program classes and non-program classes. But if you're coming in and you've eliminated everything but the program classes that first year when you just start, it can be just kind of a killer, just a motivation killer sort of thing. So we're hearing this and seeing this very clearly from a variety of folks. So what we did is actually looked at the check sheets and did some analysis. So this is an example of a degree plan, mechanical engineering for 2019 graduates, or intended graduates. And you can see all the yellow arrows are your gen ed courses. And these are, the first column is first year, second year, third year, and fourth year. So at least in mechanical, for students who are transferring in, while it seems beneficial, by design, you've got these 4 classes that are intended to help balance their course load, and these are fulfilled. And now they may be filling them with other courses. What's often happening is courses that they don't get here or here at the community college, they're instead filling them in over here, particularly in this first semester. And do stop if you have any questions and let me know. I'm not intending to keep going if you have questions, but sure. Well, and I can say as a former community college partner as well, we had students regularly in Denver want to transfer to University of Colorado Boulder or to Colorado School of Mines in engineering. And in both cases, we were also making the exact same recommendation that you really should just be here for a year and you should then transition on, which is running very counter to what the Articulation Agreement's design is, right? So that's, I think, the question. Well, and that's why we wanted to bring it up today. It's interesting. Yeah?
So even with this Articulation Agreement, an engineering student may be taking a total of 137 to 140 hours for an engineering degree?
So, yeah, in total. Correct.
How do they do that in 4 years?
Well, according to Virginia Tech public numbers, only 11% do.
And that right there is a killer. Program, isn't it?
Something that we're selling as 2+2 and 11% of students are doing it? Yeah, I agree.
It's not 2+2.
He just said it's not 2+2. I want to make sure that that is heard. I couldn't agree more. I mean, you're preaching to the choir. Absolutely. So this chart shows across all of our 14 degree plans, which are growing now with the Amazon deal, and we may be having quite a bit more degree plans emerging. But right now, 14 degree plans. Here's the average across the board of number of gen ed classes happening in the first 2 years versus the latter. So they really are designed to have some, I don't like the term fluff, but the concept of classes that help balance the technical classes. And transfer students these 9 credits are gone. While that may be helpful for a transfer student, it may also be harmful. So we also wanted to look at and see, okay, what are transfer students in the first semester actually taking? These tell you what's by design, but let's see what's actually happening. So in the first semester, transfer students are taking about 11% of their credits are electives. 2.5% are STEM electives. Often the technical elective category on the check sheet. And then the rest are major classes, and that includes your preparatory major classes, your maths, your ESMs, the things that are foundational. Let's compare that to first-time and college students. Well, there you go. This is 5th semester, so students that are in the same semester by design in the 2+2 scheme, they're taking about 5 or 4% more elective classes, and they're taking 4% less major courses. So it really is happening. What advisors are saying is very much true. And I'll let David take this part.
Great, thanks. So the second theme that came up from our interviews with advisors are this idea of toxic course combinations. And so these are their words. So one advisor said it's definitely major specific in terms of what courses they're advising students to take. We've tried to research what we call toxic course combinations. We've pulled data to see how transfer students perform in specific classes in their first semester. So this idea that these 2 courses in tandem can be really, really hard. If you can spread out some of the harder classes for students, then they might be more successful. So for example, in mechanical engineering, you have to take all your hardest courses in the first semester. When you get there, these are things like fluids, thermodynamics, and other courses all at the same time, which is extra hard. And so there's this push among the advising team to really try to spread this out, which goes counter to the idea of trying to help these students get through as quickly as they can. And that's some of the stuff that we're trying to look at analytically. Are there certain combinations that might work better for students or not? Just some other ideas. This is for aerospace and ocean engineering. Operational and computational methods are the classes that they just do not recommend students taking together because they found in working with transfer students in particular that this just plays out very poorly for their success. A few more examples here. Electrical and computer engineering, it's a signals and systems class that transfer students typically will not take in their first semester, even if they have the prereqs. And so advisors recognize that even though the study plan is set up this way, it's just not a smart idea because there is such an adjustment to coming into the Virginia Tech environment. Here too, we see this in ESM, which is the Dynamics 2 course. It's a very tough class for the current students. She was also in a couple of 4,000 level ESM courses, then in a 2,000 mechanical class, and another 2,000 level materials course. So there's this recognition that having combinations of classes can be a bad thing. Yeah, Steve?
Do you get the impression that most advisors are picking from data they've looked at or more from gut?
I would say it's a combination, and so that's what our project is trying to do is to go learn from advisors what's happening on the ground, and then to look at the data to see if that bears out. And so that's one of the things that I hope you walk away with. These are some things that you all can pull in your own data. Like if you're hearing these stories, we don't think that going to the data and just listening to the data and coming up with an answer based on that is the way to go, but it at least can give you some insight about these gut feelings. Okay. And so what we did to try to understand, our students who are more or less successful taking different courses, we decided to break it up by GPA band. So this is the cumulative GPA following the first semester at Virginia Tech. just to give you a benchmark, for transfer students, the cumulative average GPA is 3.03, so it is above that enrollment management target, which guarantees what major they get into. The real key, that is essential for students to get into their major after the first semester. If they are below a 3.0, then they can't take courses within the different majors until they do. And so this is a really, really important semester for our transfer students in particular. So what we decided to do is to take a look at how many courses are taken by each of these different bands. So for example, are the students who have below 1.0 cumulative GPA taking a certain combination of courses across these different departments compared to students who are more successful, who are able to get into their major right off the bat. And so please stop me on the next few slides if something's not adding up. But we're going to walk through each GPA grade band one at a time. So these are the students who have a cumulative GPA below 1.0. And so again, what we're trying to do is to identify potential systemic challenges for these first semester students. So a couple big take-home messages just by looking at these students who did not have a successful first semester. These are all the major discipline courses, and you can see that by and large they're not taking too many of these courses in their first semester. We see a lot of these students taking a lot of math courses, and this is number of courses overall. So it gives you a sense of kind of what departments they're taking classes from. They're taking a lot of math courses. They're taking a lot of physics courses. We see a couple departments. This is aerospace and ocean engineering, and we see electrical and computer engineering that students are taking a fair number of courses for. And so just looking at this grade band makes us wonder, are students who are taking those classes not being successful? Is that what is playing out for these GPA bands? Any questions before I start adding more bars to the chart? Okay, so now we're going to add the next grade band, and we can start understanding different stories. All right, so as we add the 1.0 to 1.99 cumulative GPA, we see that students are still taking a lot of math courses and a lot of physics courses. However, we're starting to head in the right direction, if you think of it that way, in terms of as you go up grade bands, students are doing better. And so for whatever reason, the students who are earning below 1.0 are taking a lot more physics classes than those in the next grade band. So I'm going to open up any interpretation there from your experience, why that might be the case.
Well, I actually have a question.
Sure.
Do you have any information, did they already take the physics before they transferred, or are
Sure.
they still waiting to take it later?
Right, and so that's exactly kind of the line of thinking that we're going into, is that our next step is to step into these departments to see at what level of physics are they taking. Are these actually students taking more remedial math courses compared to students who are further along in the math sequence? Those are questions that we're also addressing. We think we see a big jump here because there are certain feeder community colleges where the articulation for physics does not transfer for the Virginia Tech version of physics. And so we think this is actually showing larger systemic issues where we know that certain places are not as well resourced than others, and that's what we think we're seeing in the data. So I think the take-home message here is that we could jump right to the conclusion that, just tell students to stop taking physics, and they're going to be much, much better. But I think just sorry? Yeah, I think the big takeaway is that we're using the data to be an indicator of other larger issues. We're not just coming up with a story just by looking at the data in and of itself. So as we add the next GPA band, these are the 2.0 to 2.99 students added. We can see a couple of different patterns happening, especially when we look at the different departments. So this is a degree granting department, aerospace and ocean engineering, and we see the students who are just below the cusp of that 3.0 barrier are taking fewer courses than that. Whereas we see kind of the opposite pattern here for electrical and computer engineering. This is civil engineering and mechanical engineering. And so this starts raising some questions about what are departments doing differently? Is it the nature of the courses themselves, or is this an indicator that certain departments might be more transfer receptive than others? And so that's how we're learning from the data to kind of go into our next phase of the project to figure out why do we see different levels of success across different departments. And then the last piece of the puzzle, these are the students who are who are successful in terms of hitting that 3.0 GPA. So a few things here. We see that the students who are really successful are taking more elective courses relative to others. And so if you're imagining an academic advisor in the first year saying, how can we help students get into the major they want, they might suggest take this general elective course. It'll help your GPA, and at least the students who are getting a 3.0 to 4.0 are taking more of those courses. But this does fly in the face of, this goes against the design of the Articulation Agreement. And then, right now we're only talking about transition from year one or semester one to semester two. This could have some real negative implications at the back end of the degree program if students are still taking classes to get to their degree. Yeah, question?
Has there been any consideration in the learning style versus taking math, physics, science type course versus the major specific and how the teaching structure changes once you get into major specific classes?
Sure. So the question was about how the teaching changes and the environments change as you get into major specific classes. And yes, that's exactly where we're going to go to next. Especially when we see different patterns happening in AOE compared to civil engineering. Why are students seemingly more successful, at least as measured by first semester GPA than in others? Yes. There was another question? Yep.
Is the data broken down by gender at all? So if you look at men or women who are succeeding or not succeeding?
Sure. We have not broken it down by gender yet.
We do have it.
We do. Yeah. Yeah. Other questions?
It's a great point.
Okay. I think that's all that I wanted to say here. And just one last thing. This is, we can talk about patterns visually. This is the results of a regression analysis. So basically the way to interpret this is as the numbers go up, that means the more classes you take within a certain department. So for every increase in a class in engineering education, you'd expect a 0.1 increase in your cumulative GPA in semester one. And so we do see differences in terms of numbers of classes by department, significant differences across our majors. Questions? And then the one last thing I'll point out here is that this elective one is a significant increase. So the more gen eds a student takes, the higher their GPA is. So what we heard from the advisors is bearing out in the data. So really, you have this question or this paradox almost. It's you want to get into your major, you want to get that cumulative GPA. That's great. We can take some of these courses, but they aren't going to count toward your degree in the way that you want them. Okay, cool.
All right. So, thank you. The third and final theme that emerged from these data is advisors being really conscious about transfer shock in that first semester. It seemed to be really prevalent, particularly from an academic sense. And so I'm just going to read a few of these quotes for you. It's going to be very hard for them to jump from the community college to the junior year in the department. They need time to adjust with the department too. My concern has been this is a different environment, and I don't want them to overwhelm themselves. Don't load up on 20 credits your first semester here because for the students coming from community college, this is an adjustment of a different environment, a different school, new people, all of that at one time. And for all of you that work with transfer students, you obviously know very well transfer student capital and transfer shock and these types of ideas. And this alludes to kind of your point that while you could actually take these classes and get out in 2 years, the likelihood that you do is not very high. Students are just not successful in this high of a course load, which bears your question of the 2+2. We have to be careful about the number of discipline-specific courses that we're recommending to transfers, and we don't want to overwhelm them. So similar to our first theme, but being really strategic about the shock experience students have. And I'm going to read this last one because it's the most comprehensive and really gets at some of the data that you'll see. So taking 12 or 14 hours of 3,000 and 4,000 level in major courses doesn't actually work very well because they may end up dropping a class, which now they're below 12 hours, and obviously that has financial aid implications. Or it's just such a hard course load that their GPA suffers, which is risky in terms of the enrollment management policy. we've tried to talk to students about why you can take these 3, 4, 5 upper level courses. How about we only take maybe 2 or 3 of them? Then we'll supplement it with some type of electives, whether that's through a minor, if you need anything to fulfill your general education, or maybe it's just some good GPA boosting classes and something that you have an interest in that you've never gotten to study before. We try to balance out their schedule a little bit more. We've seen a pretty significant increase in how they were performing. I think that's been beneficial. And this particular advisor is referring to students getting into their major. And so that's one indicator, but is it necessarily the right indicator if the goal is eventually timely completion? So the first question we asked is, are electives GPA boosting? In the case of cumulative GPA, which you saw that regression before, that is the case. But we're wondering if specifically course performance in those electives is also GPA boosting. So not their cumulative GPA, but their actual performance in elective courses. And the answer is yes. So here you have the average GPA across all elective courses that students take, and it's 3.36, and that compares favorably to STEM electives, which is 3.18 average GPA, and then all the major courses, which is just a summary of all of these that you see below, is 2.87. So by taking electives, students are performing better in those classes, elective classes, compared to others. And then this just gives you an idea by major how students are performing in those courses. So students that are coming into chemical engineering, on average, are performing below a 2.0 in that first semester. Big difference compared to how students are performing in civil engineering. Any questions, thoughts, concerns before I move on? Okay. The other question we wanted to answer, based on the information we're hearing from advisors, is transfer shock happening in major courses? So for students in that first semester taking a certain set of courses, how do they do not in the first semester versus the first semester? The numbers the rows that you see there in red are courses in which students are performing quite a bit worse in their first semester compared to taking a course in other semesters. So students, as we saw with the previous slide with chemical engineering, students are doing much better in the same set of courses in other semesters than they do in that first semester. So there's something going on in the first semester that makes chemical engineering more difficult and maybe prone to transfer shock in that way. Same with aerospace, ESM courses, and then STEM electives. In the inverse, students actually in math, across the board, not by specific course, right, because math varies a lot, but in math, students are actually doing better on average in their first semester than they are across all semesters. That to me is really complicated because students, I think, may advance into more advanced math courses and maybe they get harder. There's a lot of variables there we can't really explain, but I did find it interesting. I did not expect math to be the best compared to all other programs anyways. So any questions about that? Cool. So what's next? So what we'd like to do now, since we only have part of the story, is we're going to start looking in detail, at courses specifically. And we want to know, how are students doing in the courses specifically, and then how is that impacting cumulative GPA? So we're going to start crossing over and getting a sense of, if a student takes math, let's see, 4574, vector complex analysis, in that first semester, is that really driving their cumulative GPA or not? And that's getting kind of at what these advisors are talking about, is the combination of those courses really driving students' inability to meet that enrollment management policy requirement. But as you can see, kind of putting all these together, looking at courses becomes infinitely more complex than even just your chart that we showed you that was way too small to even show on a slide. So, cool. So in summary, the first theme is that articulation agreements, while they have this gen ed benefit, it may actually have unintended consequences for transfer students, at least in how it's currently designed. Theme 2 is that there is tremendous value in exploring and understanding students' course-taking patterns. And if any of you have access or can get access to this, I think it is really fruitful to look in and start to see how students are doing. And then theme 3, advising students to balance their course load with electives may really be a way to positively impact GPA in that first semester and help with transfer shock, at least in this case. I think the biggest takeaway that David and I were interested in you all taking away is that when you harness the power of advising, knowledge, experience, gut, so on and so forth, and you complement it with looking at data, you really can start to get a much clearer picture of what's going on. In our case, it's a little bit muddy right now because we have more work to do, but really getting the whole picture of what's happening in the transfer student experience and the power of stories that are happening qualitatively, and then the power of the quantitative pieces are excellent when put together. Thank you, and questions?
When did you say they do the study abroad? I thought you said they did that the first semester.
Yeah, she asked when they do the study abroad.
Sure. So they do the study abroad in their first semester at the community college. So this is before they transfer to Virginia Tech, and that's by design so that they have a cohort of people within their discipline before they get on campus in Blacksburg. Mm-hmm. Data from the students in terms of how this plays out for them, or?
Different that have taken certain paths and have been in the articulation path.
Sure. So a couple of responses to that. The university right now is doing a major data collection effort with transfer students at large, and so we decided to hold off a semester to ask them to participate in more interviews and more surveys. I think what we hear from the advisors is kind of a bird's eye view because they're the ones who work so closely with students. So I think we have a pretty comprehensive high-level picture. Now that we have some results with data, our plan is to actually go take those and show them to students and see if they can, triangulate it, or if they have some other things that they suggest looking at. Yeah. You had a question in the back? Yes, and so this is where I think having advisors in kind of a first-year general program versus discipline advisors, they have very different perspectives on this. So if we think about our advisors early on in the transfer process, their main driver is to get students into the department they want, within that first semester. The advisors who are in the disciplines actually have kind of the very tail end of the time that they're with students, because in Virginia there is a credit cap, and after that credit cap you start getting charged higher tuition. And so that's where if a student is given the advice to take more electives, they might actually run up against that credit cap and suddenly have to pay more. And that's where the financial aid implications come in. We don't charge by credit hour at Virginia Tech, and so kind of the early on advice to take more gen ed electives doesn't really impact their financial aid. It's just the later piece where it really comes into play.
And that's different than the community college. At least in the state of Virginia, financial aid policies have really changed dramatically, and now a student, if they're enrolled in a course that's not within their degree plan, they are not eligible for financial aid on that course, and they have to pay. And I predict that's probably what's coming for the university space as well. Agreed. But yeah, we had folks who worked just in the university space that were hearing this and were just shocked. Really, that's the case at community colleges? They don't get financial aid if it's not specifically in their program? Like, you can't take anything outside of exactly what's on your degree plan. Yeah, good point. Yeah.
I think one thing we didn't emphasize in this particular talk that came out of the advisor interviews is that the enrollment management policy was not designed for transfer students or with transfer students in mind. But it plays out extremely differently because of the intersection of that articulation agreement policy and the enrollment management policy. And so that was another big takeaway. We have another paper focused on that, where it's cobbling together different policies and how they play out differently for different populations of students is really important to pay attention to. And thinking about the intersections of the policies is really crucial too. Yes?
Regarding your articulation agreement, and I know you talked a lot about that kind of waiver, not waiver of gen eds, but for the other coursework within that, when they enter through that articulation agreement, what levels are they? mean, where are they really at third year?
Sure. So I'll say a little bit, and then Abbey can fill in too. I think it's highly variable based on what school they're coming from. And so our data are showing that certainly there are community colleges in the system that students are, I don't want to say behind, they're at the more beginner levels of math in particular, whereas some of our other big partners, they're right on track, and that 2 + 2 is feasible. So it really varies based on where they come from.
Prescribe some courses that they have to get through to fulfill that agreement.
Right, no.
Yeah, so the question is if the agreement is a prescribed set of courses, and it is not. So that's part of the flaw, if I'm allowed to say a flaw. I'm trying to get back to this check sheet. So basically, as David was saying, there is some variation. When we look at the requirements that our admissions office has in place, in theory, if this is the first year, this row right here, students to be considered as transfers have to have at least 1 semester of chemistry, which is here, 1 semester of physics, which is here, 2 semesters of calc, and 2 semesters of English. But those are the only courses that are sort of prescribed in our admissions process. And so that's where, as we acknowledged, there's minimal relationship between the colleges and the admissions office. That's where things start to get a little fuzzy, right? And so that's where you start to see a little variation, because sometimes if a student has maybe 2 semesters of chemistry, the admissions office will waive that semester of physics requirement, right? And so that's where we really start to see some variation in student performance, I think. Yeah. Sure.
We do have a second. Does anybody have something that is going well at your institution related to STEM transfer that they wanted to share?
The question is about our transfer students coming with AP credits. We're seeing an increasing number, just as you all are, of students coming in with lots of AP credits, particularly as that's a big push in Virginia. We don't know yet how that impacts the toxic combinations, but one thing that we have found is that is what is catching people up in this guaranteed admission agreement that we have, because maybe the community colleges accepted a 3 on the English exam, right? And then tech requires a 4. And so we're finding that students are coming in and they're getting the guaranteed admission, but they're having to then back up and take 2 semesters of English or calculus again. And so I think that would be really interesting to dig into. Yeah.
Cool. So STEM is a very complicated world, and you all are wonderful for working in it. We're happy to stick around for the few minutes that we have, but thank you guys so much for coming, and hope you learned something and can take something back.